never imagined betrayal could look so smug, so polished, so arrogant. But there he was, Ethan, swaggering into our living room with sunglasses tossed carelessly on the coffee table, his new tailored suit clinging perfectly to his frame, shoes gleaming like he'd stepped straight off a Paris runway. His luggage stuffed with designer labels clattered against the floor. "Thanks for the upgrade, my dear," he grinned, his voice oozing triumph. I should have been furious. I should have screamed. But instead I laughed, a sharp, broken laugh that surprised even me. Because Ethan had no idea what he had really done. "My name is Sarah, and I am 34 years old. For the past 7 years I've worked in cybersecurity, quietly protecting corporations from the schemes of liars and thieves. At the same time, I've also been married to one." Ethan had always been the dreamer, the smooth talker. The kind of man who could charm strangers at a dinner party, make empty promises sound like golden opportunities, and convince everyone, including me, that he was destined for greatness. Meanwhile, I was the anchor. I was the one holding down a steady career, paying the bills, managing the chaos of his half-baked business ideas that never went anywhere. I ignored the warning signs, his financial secrecy, his excuses for why he couldn't hold a stable job, because I wanted to believe in us. I wanted to believe that marriage meant being a team. But then came the night he crossed a line I could never forgive. It was 2 a.m. when he did it. I was upstairs sleeping, exhausted after a 14-hour day of client work, when Ethan crept downstairs. He waited until my breathing was deep and steady. He thought I would never know. But in the still glow of my laptop screen, he proved me wrong. He opened my computer, found my credit card information, and copied it down. Not just copied, he took photos of it with his phone, his hands quick and practiced as if he'd done this before. Then he crept back into bed, sliding under the covers, like nothing had happened. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee, the alerts began. My phone buzzed and buzzed until my heart sank. Nearly $50,000 in charges, designer clothing, luxury watches, first-class tickets to Paris. I felt sick. And yet beneath the shock, I felt something else. Recognition. Because of course it was Ethan. Who else could it have been? But instead of panicking, I smiled. You see, Ethan hadn't used my personal credit card. The card he'd stolen was a dummy account I used for training at work. A decoy card tied directly to fraud detection systems, designed to alert authorities the moment suspicious charges occurred. Every swipe, every splurge in Paris, every drunken night in some luxury hotel, it all triggered alarms. Ethan hadn't stolen from me. He had turned himself into a case study, and I was the one watching. I called my lawyer Chloe that same morning. "You're not going to believe this," I told her, explaining every detail. She burst out laughing. "Wait, you're telling me he stole that card, the fraud detection one?" "Exactly," I said, my voice tight with restrained satisfaction. "Oh my God, Sarah, he's digging his own grave with every swipe. Do you realize what this means?" "I do," I whispered. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of power shift back into my hands. For the rest of the week, I stayed silent, watching from afar as the alerts rolled in. Ethan had left a note on the counter. "Taking some time for myself. Don't wait up," as though he were some free-spirited traveler instead of a petty thief. I knew exactly what that meant. He was abroad, indulging himself with what he thought was my money. High-end restaurants, 5-star hotels, designer boutiques. Each notification that lit up my phone felt like a small victory, a reminder that he was writing his own downfall, one receipt at a time. 3 days into his spree, I got the call I'd been expecting. A federal investigator, Agent Keller, introduced himself with a voice as calm as a blade. "We've identified significant fraudulent activity tied to one of your accounts," he said. "Do you know who might be responsible?" "Yes," I answered without hesitation, "my husband." There was a long pause on the other end. Then a low whistle. "That's a new one," he muttered. I told him everything: the dummy card, my work in cybersecurity, Ethan's betrayal. "You'll need to provide a statement," Keller said. "But based on what we've already flagged, your husband is in serious trouble." By the time Ethan finally strutted back through our front door a week later, drunk on indulgence and arrogance, I was ready. He sauntered in as if he owned the world, his designer duffel spilling stolen luxuries across the carpet. "Thanks for the upgrade," he smirked again, dropping a shiny gold watch onto the table. And I smiled. Not out of love, not out of forgiveness, but because I knew Ethan had no idea what storm was already waiting for him. He swaggered around the living room like a man returning from conquest, dropping receipts and boxes like trophies. A pair of Italian leather shoes, a silk tie, a bottle of champagne he must have smuggled from some Parisian hotel minibar. He looked at me expecting awe, maybe envy, but all I felt was a hollow ache of recognition. This was who Ethan had always been: hungry for attention, desperate for validation, careless with other people's sacrifices. Only now his greed had a paper trail that would crush him. "Don't just stand there," he said, loosening his tie. "Say something." I met his eyes steady. "How was Paris?" He blinked, then grinned. "Unforgettable. You should have seen me on the Champs-Élysées. I fit right in. They thought I was somebody." "You are somebody," I replied softly. "Somebody who's about to face consequences." The smile faltered, just for a second. Then he laughed, too loud, too forced. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't answer. Instead, I picked up one of the receipts he'd tossed aside. 12,800 tars, at a boutique jeweler. My fingers brushed over the numbers, and for a fleeting moment I remembered the years I had begged him to budget with me, to save for a future, to act like a partner. All those nights I stayed up crunching numbers so we wouldn't drown in debt. And here he was, proud of stealing fake riches. "You know," I said carefully, "it's funny. You thought you were outsmarting me. But the whole time I was watching. Every charge, every swipe, every lie." His face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" I set the receipt down and leaned closer. "That wasn't my real credit card, Ethan. It was a decoy. A fraud detection account tied directly to law enforcement." He staggered back like I had struck him. "You're lying." "Am I?" I pulled my phone from my pocket, scrolling through the string of alerts still flashing on my screen. Paris, Milan, Geneva. Every transaction tracked, every location flagged. They know exactly where you've been. For the first time I saw fear flicker in his eyes. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then ran a hand through his hair. You wouldn't report me. We're married. You'd never." I let the silence stretch, heavy and deliberate. He didn't know that I already had. That night, while he slept fitfully beside me, I sat in the kitchen drafting my formal statement for Agent Keller. My hands trembled, not from doubt, but from release. Every word I typed was a confession of years spent enabling him, excusing him, forgiving him. But this time I wasn't covering his tracks, I was exposing them. The next morning the knock came, sharp, decisive, echoing through the hallway. Ethan stumbled out of bed, rubbing his eyes, confusion etched across his face. I was already dressed, coffee cup in hand, waiting. When he opened the door, 2 agents stood there, badges gleaming. "Ethan Ward," one asked. He stuttered, Yeah, you're under investigation for financial fraud. We need you to come with us." His head whipped toward me, wild panic breaking through his composure. "Sarah, do something." I just sipped my coffee, meeting his gaze with a calm I had never felt before. "I already did." They cuffed him on the porch, his protests echoing down the street. Neighbors peeked through curtains. A dog barked in the distance. I stood in the doorway watching as the man I once promised forever to was led away, finally caught in a net of his own making. But even as the car pulled out of the driveway, I knew this wasn't the end. Betrayal leaves scars deeper than any prison sentence, and mine were just beginning to surface. The silence after the police car disappeared was heavier than any argument we had ever had. I stood in the doorway, coffee cooling in my hands, staring at the spot where Ethan had been dragged away. Part of me wanted to collapse, to sob for the marriage that had crumbled into ashes. But another part, the stronger part, felt something close to relief. I went back inside, sat at the kitchen table, and let my eyes drift over the receipts and shopping bags he had flaunted. Paris, Milan, Geneva, all paid for with the arrogance of a man who thought he could keep me blind forever. My phone buzzed. It was Agent Keller. "Mrs. Ward, thank you for your cooperation," he said. "Your husband's accounts and movements have been logged. We'll be pursuing charges. Do you need me for anything else?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "Just to be ready," he replied. "Cases like this can get messy, but with your statement we're in good shape." After the call ended, I sat in silence, my fingers tracing the rim of my mug. 7 years of marriage reduced to legal documents and case files. I thought about the vows I had spoken, the promises I had believed in, the nights I had clung to hope that he would change. And then I thought about the moment he crept into my office at 2 a.m. and stole from me without hesitation, without love. That was the truth of who he was. Days blurred into one another. The house felt emptier without his presence, but strangely lighter too. No more excuses, no more lies, no more endless tension about money. Just me and the echo of betrayal. One afternoon I got a call from his lawyer. "Sarah, Ethan wants to speak with you," she said. "I have nothing to say to him," I answered. "He insists it's important." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. The jail visitation room smelled of disinfectant and despair. He sat across from me in an orange jumpsuit, his charm stripped down to something desperate and raw. "Sarah," he began, leaning toward the glass, "you don't understand. I didn't mean for it to get this far." I laughed bitterly. "You didn't mean to get caught, you mean?" His jaw tightened. "We can fix this. If you withdraw your statement." "Withdraw my statement?" I cut him off, my voice trembling with fury. "You stole from me, Ethan. You betrayed me. And you didn't even flinch. You thought I was too stupid, too naive to notice. But I did. And now you want me to save you?" He slammed his hand against the glass. "I'm your husband." "No," I said quietly. "You were my mistake." I stood to leave, my chair scraping against the floor. His voice rose behind me, a mix of rage and fear. "You'll regret this, Sarah. You'll regret everything." But I didn't look back. That night, alone in my bed, his words echoed in my head. Not as a threat, but as a promise I refused to let come true. I would not regret choosing myself, not again. Weeks later, the trial began. I sat in the courtroom, my hands folded in my lap, watching as Ethan tried to spin his story, painting himself as a victim, claiming it was a misunderstanding, that he was borrowing the money. But the evidence was overwhelming. Transaction logs, surveillance footage, my testimony. Every lie he told unraveled under the weight of proof. When the verdict was read, guilty on multiple counts of fraud, he turned toward me. His eyes burned with hatred, but I felt nothing, no fear, no pity, just closure. Still, when the gavel struck, I realized the real trial wasn't his, it was mine. Could I rebuild from this? Could I learn to trust again? I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew one thing for certain: I was free. The courtroom emptied slowly, the shuffle of feet and murmurs of strangers fading behind me as I stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. For a moment I just stood there on the courthouse steps, the sunlight warm on my skin, breathing in freedom. Not his, mine. 7 years of carrying Ethan's weight had ended with the slam of a gavel. But as I walked to my car, I felt the ache of everything I had lost. Love, trust, innocence. The quiet belief that marriage meant safety. I had thought I was building a life with someone who would stand beside me. Instead, I had been sleeping beside a thief. Back home, the silence of the house greeted me again. I wandered through the rooms, touching the edges of furniture we had picked out together, the photos still on the walls. In one picture, we were laughing in Rome on our honeymoon, his arm around me, the world at our feet. I stared at it for a long time, wondering how someone who once made me feel so cherished could turn into someone who gutted me without remorse. My phone buzzed. It was Chloe, my lawyer. "It's official," she said. The judge finalized his sentence. "Ethan will serve 4 years minimum with restitution." "Restitution?" I asked, startled. "Yes. The court is ordering him to repay damages. You'll see something from his accounts eventually." I let out a hollow laugh. Money couldn't heal what he had broken, but it felt like a strange kind of justice, his greed now chained to responsibility. That night I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the back porch. The stars blinked above me, and for the first time in years I didn't feel like I had to keep watch. No secrets lurking in the shadows. No lies waiting to unravel. Just me, the night sky, and a fragile sense of peace. But peace didn't erase the questions that haunted me. Why hadn't I listened to my instincts sooner? Why had I given him so many chances? Why had I believed the smooth lies over the quiet alarms in my own chest? The truth was painful but simple, because I had loved him. And because I had loved, I had excused the inexcusable. Weeks passed. Life found a new rhythm. I focused on my work in cybersecurity, diving into projects that challenged me, reminded me of my worth. Colleagues praised my precision, clients trusted my vigilance. For once, I was pouring all my energy into protecting myself as fiercely as I protected others. One evening, Jenna, my closest friend, came over with takeout. She set the boxes down, and gave me a long searching look. "You're different," she said. "How so?" I asked. "Lighter," she said. "Like you've been carrying a boulder and finally put it down." I smiled faintly. "That's because I have." We ate in silence for a while before she asked the question I knew was coming. "Do you think you'll ever forgive him?" I stared at my glass, watching the condensation bead down the side. Forgiveness. It sounded noble but also impossible. "Maybe someday," I whispered. "But forgiveness isn't for him, it's for me. And right now I'm not ready to give him anything more, not even that." Later when she left, I stood at the window staring at the moonlight pooling over the lawn. Ethan's betrayal would always mark me a scar across the story of my life. But scars weren't just reminders of pain, they were proof of survival. And as I closed the curtains, I realized survival was only the beginning. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was beginning to live. Months slipped into a new season, and with it came a version of myself I had never known before. I wasn't just the woman who had been betrayed. I was the woman who had endured, who had fought back, who had carved a path out of the ruins. On the morning of Ethan's official sentencing hearing, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. Not because I cared how he saw me, he had lost that privilege forever, but because I wanted to see myself clearly. 34 years old. Stronger lines around my eyes, not from age, but from surviving nights of tears and days of holding everything together. My reflection didn't look broken anymore. It looked unshakable. At the courthouse, I sat quietly as the judge read the sentence. 4 years in prison, mandatory restitution, no room for excuses or charm. Ethan didn't even look at me this time. His shoulders were hunched, his once practiced smirk gone. For a fleeting second, I felt a pang of grief, not for him, but for the love I had wasted on someone who never valued it. When the gavel fell for the last time, it was as though chains I hadn't realized were still clinging to me finally snapped. I walked out of that room into the sunlight with my head high, the weight gone from my chest. Life after Ethan wasn't glamorous or cinematic. It was quieter, steadier, filled with small victories that stitched me back together. I redecorated the house piece by piece, removing traces of him. I traveled for work and sometimes for pleasure, standing in airports and smiling at the irony he had stolen flights that never belonged to him, while I now chose destinations freely with my own earned freedom. And slowly I began to trust again, not in another man, not yet, but in myself, in my judgment, in my resilience. One evening I sat on my porch with a journal in hand. I wrote down everything I had learned from this journey, that love without respect is just captivity, that loyalty means nothing when it is one-sided, that betrayal can strip you bare, but also reveal the bones of who you truly are. I closed the journal, breathed in the cool night air, and let a single thought settle deep inside me. Ethan hadn't destroyed me. He had revealed me, and maybe that was the lesson I needed most. So if you're listening to my story, and you've ever been betrayed by someone you trusted, someone who took everything you gave and still made you feel small, please hear me when I say this. You are not broken. You are not powerless. And you are not defined by their betrayal. You can take back your story. You can rebuild. You can rise. If my story touched you, please like this video. Share it with someone who needs courage. Subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and leave a comment to share your own. Together, we remind each other that betrayal is not the end. It's the beginning of becoming who we were meant to be.